Okay, introduce yourself for those who might not know who you are.
Okay, my name is Bio. I'm one of the members of TATS CRU. I started painting graffiti here in New York City in 1980.
Okay, let's jump into it. What borough and neighborhood are you from?
I'm from the Bronx. I grew up here in the Bronx, and I've lived here most of my life. I just actually recently moved back. I was living in Harlem for about 12, 13 years. I just moved back to the Bronx. So yeah, Bronx is my hometown.
Okay, when did you start noticing graffiti?
I started noticing graffiti probably like around 1979. Around there, I was maybe about 14 years old, 1979. And I remember coming off of a subway car, and like the doors closing, and there was like this huge cartoon character on the outside of the car on the subway, and I was like, oh wow! I was like, what is that? I was like, I want to do that, because I've always been into like drawing. I used to like copy the comic books from the Sunday comics and stuff like that. So when I saw that cartoon character on the train, I ran back to my neighborhood and I started asking everyone. I was like, yo, what is that? I said, I saw some stuff on the train. They were like, oh man, that's graffiti. I was like, graffiti? I was like, what is that? What's that? They were like, you got to get a name and you got to get up. So I was like, oh man, I need to find out more about this. So I just started, asking everybody that I could, that I knew nothing about it. And then that's when, from that point on, was that aha awareness moment where I noticed it everywhere and I started to recognize certain names that I would see.
Okay, um, who were some of the artists that you seen up at the time?
At that time when I first started, like the big names, were like it was like the heyday of New York, so the trains were flooded. You had guys like Scene, Duster, you had Dondi, you had Zephyr, you had the Rockstar crew, Kaz, Shy, Kel, Crash, you had Days, Dez, you had so many. Some of the names that you hear from all these books are, you know, documentaries, but this is the stuff we were living. We were coming up watching this live.
Okay, are those the people that influence you?
Definitely, for sure. All those guys. It was just a whole huge movement in New York. You had so many different writers and so many different, people piecing, insides, outsides, draw. Some people specialize, the stylized draw up. Some people had like that really nice hand style, like Zephyr. Then you had people doing burners and just rocking. It was just you had so much information out there and so much to look at, but you had to be out there. It wasn't like in the internet where you could Google it. You literally had to go and stand on a subway platform for hours, or stand somewhere where you could see the subway for hours and just watch stuff go by, and you would get like a quick, you know, 30-second glimpse of stuff rolling by, and you're like, oh, did you see those colors? Did you see, you know?
Okay, what year did you start writing in?
I started writing in 1980, and again, I was a toy, just starting out, and it was like no, I didn't know much about it, so I was just trying to like find other people who knew, maybe a little bit more or something that I didn't know, and that was just the way it was back then.
Okay, how did you come up with your name Bio?
My name Bio was I came up with. I was hanging out with a friend of mine in the project. I grew up in Bronx Road Projects. His name was Kenny. He used to write VUE, and he had really good hand style. And at the time, I had been trying out different names. I was trying like DAB, VIO, BIC, and then he did like a BIO tag. And I was like, I like the way the letters fit. And he was like, what about this name? And I was like, yeah, that looks pretty dope. And he had good hand style, so I kind of stuck with that name, and just started to push that name, and it is what it is to this day.
Okay, I assume you was in high school when you started. What high school did you go to, and were there any other artists that went to the same school with you?
Actually, I started in junior high school. I met that's where I actually met Brim and Bass, who were like the early members of the crew. But the crew wasn't even really formed yet. That was where we met in junior high school, 127 in Castle Hill. And then from there, Brim was friends with Mac, who lived in Harlem at the time. And then I remember going to Mac's. He used to live like on 116, 117 somewhere. We went to Mac's building, and then Brim did like a TAT tag, and he was like, yo, we're gonna do this crew. What do you think this crew is? We'll do it with an A, because at the time they were like TNT, TMT. So we were like, we'll do the crew with an A, and it'll be the first one in the album, like TAT. So it was like tough ass team, top artistic talent. So we started pushing, and then at that time, you know, starting out, Mac and Brim started to push the crew doing insides, and then as time went on, you know, when we got to high school, is when the crew started to grow. Comes the introduction of like Nice, BG, Ken, Sem, you know, the rest of Volcan, SHAME125, you know, other guys who were part of the crew back then, Raz.
Okay. What was the first crew you was in, and who was down with the crew?
The first crew I was in was TAT, and the early members were Brim, myself, Mac, and then bass. And then trying to think if there were any other crews back then, that like graph crews that are really, not really. I didn't really have any other crews.
Okay. Let's talk about TATS CRU. You, of course, with Mac and Brim are founding members. How did y'all meet, and whose idea was it to come up with the crew?
We met. Brim and I met in high school, and then I met Mac through Brim. I'm not sure how Brim and Mac connected. I'm not sure, because I know Brim used to work in Harlem in La Maqueta, but I don't know how him and Mac became friends. But I think Brim was the one who originally came up with the idea for TAT. And then, you know, the rest of us just started, you know, pushing TAT, and it continued to grow.
Okay. How did you link up with BG183 and Nicer, and what is your fondest memory of painting with them?
Funny, I met BG and Nicer in high school. We all attended James Monroe High School. And the crazy story with BG was, like, I was in a gym class. BG was older, so BG was like in a weight training class. Me, I was a freshman, whatever, and I had like regular gym. But I met him in the locker room. Like, you had to bring a lock, and every day BG wouldn't bring his lock. And then he came up to me, he was like, yo, can I share your locker? And I used to be like I was like, who the fuck is this guy? And he was like, yo, and I was like, all right, whatever. So I would share my locker with him, but I never gave him the combination, so he would have to wait for me, like, to come back to open up the locker. And then after a while, you know, I wound up giving him the combination. But then the crazy thing was, I had major art class, and then when I go to my major art class, who was sitting there? BG happened to be in my same art class. I was like, oh no, it's the dude from the gym. And then we became cool, you know.
Okay. Did you ever go to the writer's bench at 149th Street? And who were some of the names that you remember always being at the bench?
Yeah, the writer's bench, I mean, I'll tell you my first experience. I remember the first time we went to the bench, we didn't even get off the train. That's how fucking crazy it was. Like, we was in the last car of the 2 train, whatever, 2 or 5, pulled up to 149 Grand Concourse. When the doors opened, it was just like the buzz and the energy was like so like raw, and we were like, nah, we didn't even get off the train. We was like, fuck that shit, it looked too wild. But then after a while, you know, as time passed, we started hanging out there. Met other writers. I think that's actually how we met SHAME125. We met at the bench.
Okay. What lines did you write on, and did you king any?
I mean, we painted on the 6 trains. We did the 2 and the 5s, the 4 trains, mostly the IRT lines. You know, very rarely did we venture to like letter lines here in New York, because you had like the IRTs, which are the number lines, and then you had the BMTs and the INDs, which are like the letter lines, which travel out to like other borough, Queens, Brooklyn, and cover that kind of area.
Okay. What were some of your favorite layups to hit back in the days?
My first layup that I started going to were above ground layups, were like Zariga, between like Zariga and the next stop, Westchester Square. That was my first layup going to, and you know, again, I didn't know, so, but those layups were very exposed, like people could see you from the street. And then from there we started going to like the 6 tunnels here in between Longwood and 149th, or between Longwood and Hunts Point. So it was all a learning process, and we did, again, remember, we were toys, so nobody's gonna teach you nothing. So we basically had to go and travel and see where these layups were. Like, we weren't even at the level of going to the yards yet. So it was either, just going to those layups and then jumping in the tracks right there and painting, but that was all that was available to us at the time.
Okay, so what were your peak years on the subway?
Our peak years, I want to say, is probably from 83 to about 86, like 3 strong years of painting. Like a bulk of the work got, although we was painting beforehand, I think the bulk of the work of what people saw happened between those years. And then I think the last subway train that we painted during that era was like 87. And at that time it was just, for us, life was changing. It was no longer in high school, whatever. You got to get a job, that kind of shit. New York City was cracking down on graffiti. So we kind of like moved away from the subways and just started like, occasionally painting outdoors, handball courts or, rooftops or whatever, highways, and kind of slowed down a bit from doing graph on subways. Even though there was an era in New York that continued after that, which became like known as the clean train era or whatever movement.
Okay, during the 80s, the one tunnel could be pretty tough. Did you have any memorable experiences there?
Me personally, I never even went to the one tunnel. Like, I heard stories, so many stories about the one tunnel, but I never got the chance to go paint in the one tunnel. The only time I ever painted on the one train was on an elevated layup where it was with Swan 3, Swan, Slin, and Zeke. And these guys, they were from the one train. And that was the only time I really painted on the one train. That was like too far west for us. We stood more to like the east of New York.
Okay. Do you have any raid or chase stories that you can tell us?
Oh man, and we've had some doozies. I remember one where we got we were at Intervale Station here, which is a very high elevated train platform. It's like probably one of the highest in the city, and we're on the uptown side of the platform, and we look across. And at the time, there was vandal squad officers called HICKEY and SKI. So we're standing there with shopping bags. We're about to go paint. When we're standing there with but we're not gonna paint there. We were just meeting somebody there. We were gonna take the train and go somewhere. But he comes up on the opposite side of the platform, and we look across the platform, and we're like, oh shit. It's fucking Hickey. So we're like, all right, cool, just play it cool. We're not doing nothing. We're just standing. So he's looking at us, we're looking at him. So we're like, let's see what he's gonna do. All of a sudden we see him heading back down the stairs. So we're like, he's coming over here. So we hurried off to the end of the edge of the platform. And we there with our shopping bags. And then all of a sudden we see him pop up on our side. So we was like, fuck that. We jumped in the tracks, started running. The trains were coming actually coming. So the train stopped in the middle of the tracks. We're on the tracks running. So then what we did was squeeze through the tracks and started like shimmying down the pole. So I went down first, and I think it was Nisa, a friend of ours named Cuchillo, who didn't even write. Lays, a few other people. And then I'm like, throw the bags of paint down. But remember, this is now like 3-4 stories. It's like 3 stories, 4 stories up. So I thought I was gonna catch the bags of paint. But as they came down, they would pick up speed, and I was like, oh shit. So they would hit the floor, boom. Some of the cans would bust. I was grabbing what I could and dragging it and trying to stash it in like this abandoned lot that was there. So long story short, like halfway, our boy Cuchillo, who doesn't write, he got halfway down. He jumps from there, like from halfway, and this shit is mad high. So he fucked up his legs. Like his shit ballooned up. So we get down, and that's on the 5 and 2 train that we get chased. We run into the schoolyard, we're resting. We're like, by that point we're already splitting off. Like, some people went one way. So I'm there, me, Nisa, I think Cuchillo got away, even though he fucked up his legs. We're resting, all of a sudden we see the transit paddy wagon circle around. We're like, oh shit, so now we start running. We ran across from the 2 and 5 train all the way to the other side, to Longwood, to the 6 train, which is about, 10, 15-minute walk, run, whatever. So we running through alleys, cutting through, and they're still chasing us through the streets. We get to Longwood, which is an underground. That's an underground. So me and Nisa, I cut off, and I start running towards the Longwood train station. Nisa runs into a building, and he hides. He goes in the building and hides behind the steps. Me, I go down. The paddy wagon is behind me. Boom! They jump up on the sidewalk, and they try to block the exit. I go around the car and I go down the stairs. I hop the turnstile. I got the cops running behind me. I ran to the end of the platform again, jumped in the tracks again, and went into the tunnel. Ran in the tunnel, and it was a weekend, so there was no express train. I ran in there, and I looked back, and I see the cops at the edge of the platform. They didn't want to jump into the tracks. I went in all the way. So what I did, that was Longwood, so I went between Longwood and Hunts Point, halfway, and then I stood near the emergency hatch, because in between tunnels, there's stations, there's usually an emergency hatch. I said, I'm not going to go up. I said, I'm going to stay here. So I stood there at least 5 hours, till nighttime. I stood there like just in the dark, in the middle track, listening to see. And then what I didn't know what was going on upstairs, Nice had got caught. Because the building he ran up to, on the roof, there was an off-duty cop fixing his mother's antenna. So he saw Nisa, he saw all the commotion, like the cops chasing us, Nisa running the building. So he ran down. So Nisa was behind the stairs. So he heard Nisa's story. He hears boom, 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 like somebody running downstairs. So the guy gets to the bottom of the stairs, and Nisa goes, "Yo, you see any cops out there?" And the guy just pulled out a badge and grabbed Nisa. So then Nisa was like, "Yo," they had Nisa in the car. They went to the emergency hatch in between, and they were waiting for me to see if I was gonna pop up. Nisa said, "We were there waiting for you. Like he's gonna pop." I was like, I said, "Nah, I stood there till nighttime. I didn't come out till it was dark." And then that was just one of the days we had a fucking crazy story like that.
Okay. You would eventually meet CEM2 and SHAME125. How did you meet those two, and what memories do you have with them?
Shame, I remember, I think we met him at the bench, and I remember looking at his black book, and we were like, "Oh my goodness, like this dude is a beast." Like, the characters and the style, like his style was simple, but it was so stylish that we were like, damn, he had like that real raw graph flavor, and he was a real cool, humble guy, and we just kind of connected, And then CEM2, first he used to write, before he wrote CEM2, he used to write Deuce, and he used to hang out with these other writers called Back in Tan. So that was his original boys, Back in Tan. And how we connected with Sem is, I don't know if it was through Ken, because I remember we met Ken, and then so Ken might have connected with Pete, with Sem, and then that's how we all met. But I remember originally Pete was with Back in Tan. It was some guys that actually Mac actually went over some of their Back used to do these blockbusters, and then Mac could just come and go over them. Like he'd do a Mac over it, or like Tan did a car of Tan the Man, and then Mac came and changed it to Tan the Toy. It was crazy. So kind of actually had minor beef with Pete's old crew.
Okay, who were TATS CRU biggest rivals painting back in the days, and did y'all end up in some type of battle?
I remember these guys. I don't remember their crew, but I remember for a while we were at it with it was me and Mac, Ken. We were at it like bombing the insides. We were at war with these guys, JR, Sweet, and We. So it was a full-on like just battle back and forth of just crossing each other out, dogging each other's insides, and obviously we kind of won that battle, but that was the only real intense battle like that where we had people actually giving us competition back.
Okay. Okay, so it's been about 20 years since Pun passed away. I know how it affected us in Dallas, but you actually kicked it with him. So what are your memories with him or about him?
I remember Pun. We met obviously through Fat Joe, uh, and the first time we saw Pun, you know, he was this fat dude. He had like a ponytail, crazy haircut, and but he was a comedian. He always was funny, like a funny dude, and like it doesn't matter if he was fat. Like you can't really snap on him because he was fucking good. Like you was just don't fuck with him. You know, you let him be. And that was our memories of Pun, him being a funny guy. But you know, obviously he was a gifted lyricist. So when he first came out, you know, he just took fucking world by storm. And then when he passed away, we were here actually. We were actually scheduled to go do murals for his album release because at the time we were doing a promotional campaign. Like we had did it for Joe's albums. You know, every time we would go, we had locations throughout the city. We would go paint murals to promote the album. So we were scheduled to actually do Pun's album, and somebody calls here, and they go, "Yo, is it true that Pun passed away?" And we were like, "I don't know. This is the first we're hearing of it, right?" So we're like, so then somebody else calls, "Yo, you heard Pun passed?" We're like, "Nah." I'm like, "Hold up." So I call Joe, Fat Joe, and his wife Lorena picks up. And I'm like, "Yo, Lorena, we're hearing that Pun passed away." She's like, "Yeah, he passed away this morning." So we're like, "Oh shit," hung up. We're like, "Oh shit, fucking Pun passed away." Yo, we're like, "That's crazy." So we like, well, we decided instead of going to do the walls for his album, we went. There was a wall here that we had in the Bronx, where the Big Pun actually memorial wall is now. We used to have a mural there. We, you know, me and BG did like burners, and then Nysa did this character with like a bulletproof vest, two guns, and like a Puerto Rican bandana. So Pun always liked that wall. He had, when he first came out, you know, when rappers do those publicity photos, he took a picture in front of that wall, you know, for his publicity photos. So we were like, why don't we do a memorial wall for him on that wall that he always liked. We went and that's where we did the first Big Pun Memorial where it is now today. But that's how that came about.
Okay, I think we covered a lot today. And is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to cover?
I mean, there's a lot I don't know. And we've had a long career just from Subways. This is just from Subways, and then from the Subways on becomes a new chapter, another whole other chapter where, you know, a lot of the guys stop painting. Me, Nice, and BG continue painting, you know, as a business. We started out a business like in the early mid-90s, and then from there is when, you know, the introduction of How Nazem, Totem, you know, some of the other guys that later came into the crew. And then since there till now, you know, it's been a journey where we've gone from doing commercial murals to now doing stuff for galleries. You know, we've worked with major corporations, and we've now been doing this as a business for about 25 years. So, you know, it's a long journey from the Subways till today.
Okay. Okay. Any last words or shout outs to any family members or friends?
I just want to give a shout out to the rest of the crew. You know, all these guys who we experienced this life together. You know, those are memories that we can't ever forget. You know, those were some good times.
All right. Well, thanks for the interview. Bio, TATS CRU.